Although President Reagan had called the Soviet Union an evil empire, and he spent more than any other administration on the arms race with the Soviet Union, he actually began to have better relations with the Soviets after Mikhail Gorbachev became the Soviet premier. Okay, so Gorbachev, he changed Soviet policy and he encouraged the population to freely express themselves on political matters. Okay, this was the policy of glasnost. Okay, so the public can now express themselves. Previously, you'd get put in jail or maybe even a mental institution, or you get blacklisted if you were critical of the Soviet government. But now, the Soviet Union was promoting something closer to free speech. And Soviet satellite countries began to start to call for more autonomy from the Soviet Union because now they're speaking freely. Now, Gorbachev also began to relinquish some government control of the economy, and this was called the policy of perestroika. So in the mid 1980s, Gorbachev and Reagan met, and they agreed to take all intermediate and short-range nuclear missiles out of Europe. Okay, but perestroika was unsuccessful in saving the Soviet economy. Why? Well, the government spent too much on the military and not enough on developing its consumer goods. Okay, its factories and technology were outdated. People were waiting in bread lines for food, and their healthcare system was in shambles. Now, in the 1960s, the Soviet Union had built the Berlin Wall to stop migration from East Berlin, which was controlled by the Soviets, to West Berlin, which was controlled by the United States, Britain, and France. Okay, so they built the Berlin Wall to stop migration. But in 1989, East German leaders allowed citizens to breach the Berlin Wall amid massive protests, and millions crossed over into Western Germany temporarily. Okay, just as an act to show where they stood. You know, like they're finally free now to cross over into Western Germany, so they're breaking down the Berlin Wall. They're crossing over. Within a year, East and West Germany had reunified under West Germany's democratic constitution. Remember, West Germany had been under the control of the US, Britain, and France, right? So it's a democracy. So by 1991, 15 nations, including Russia, had pulled out of the Soviet Union and they became independent states. Some view the fall of the Berlin Wall as the end of the Cold War, but the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991 definitely marked the end of the Cold War. And so the US had prevailed over the Soviet Union. In the election of 1988, George H.W. Bush, Ronald Reagan's vice president, was elected president of the United States. And in 1990, President Bush sent American troops and the Navy to stop the Iraq invasion of Kuwait. Okay, Kuwait's oil fields would have helped to boost the economy of Iraq, but you can't just invade another country and take its resources, right? Or maybe you can. We see that today. At least, you know, that's the type of behavior that the United Nations was trying to outlaw in the international community. And so the American attack on Iraq in Operation Desert Storm had pushed Iraqi forces out of Kuwait, and Iraq was ordered to disarm militarily. Iraq also faced heavy economic sanctions, which hurt their economy and caused suffering for thousands of Iraqi people. In 1992, President Bush was unable to win a second term. Okay, instead, Democrat Bill Clinton, former governor of Arkansas, was elected president. Clinton supported a number of liberal measures such as endorsing the earned income tax credit, which helps to lower your tax rate for those with low to moderate incomes. He supported the don't ask, don't tell policy for gay soldiers in the military. If they do not go public about being gay, then the military won't question them. And Clinton appointed several liberal judges to the Supreme Court. But in going on into his second term, Clinton supported several conservative measures, such as the elimination of the federal welfare program, Aid to Families with Dependent Children, or AFDC. Okay, so he gets rid of welfare. As a result, welfare came under complete control of the states, not the federal government, but the states, many of which had, I guess you could say, they set eligibility criteria, which was very restrictive for many Americans, so that many Americans were no longer eligible for welfare, okay, or AFDC, Aid to Families with Dependent Children. Now, this move greatly contrasted with the Democratic Party's support of the welfare state. So you see President Clinton, and mostly a liberal, but he also does take some conservative measures. President Clinton was also heavily involved in foreign issues during his 2 terms as president. He attempted to help broker a peace between Israel and Palestine after both sides were unable to make progress after signing the Oslo Accords, which was an agreement where Israel recognized the Palestinian Liberation Organization, or the PLO. And the PLO likewise had recognized the state of Israel. That was all in the Oslo Accords, okay? So this was a big step, because you can't have proper peace negotiations until both sides choose to recognize the legitimacy of the other side. The Oslo Accords created the Palestinian Authority, okay, the Palestinian Authority, which gained the right to govern parts of the Gaza Strip and the West Bank. But the peace process was not moving forward, as Israel continued to colonize parts of the Palestinian West Bank region, and Palestinian organizations planned to attack Israel. Clinton tried to bring both sides together to continue the peace process in negotiations at Camp David in the United States, but he was unable to make any progress. Now, under Clinton, the United States got involved in a conflict in Yugoslavia in 1999 as Serbian and Yugoslavian troops attacked the ethnic Albanians in the area of Kosovo in an effort to force them out of the region, okay, which is a process known as ethnic cleansing. Earlier in the 1990s, Serbian and Yugoslav forces attempted to stop the Bosnian nationalist movement in the region, which led to over 100,000 Bosnian deaths, and many more were driven from their homes. So as hundreds of thousands of Albanians were being pushed out of Kosovo, and they eventually became refugees, NATO decided to get involved without the permission of the UN Security Council. Okay, so without the permission of the UN, native forces, including US troops, began a bombing campaign in 1999 that forced the retreat of the Yugoslavian and Serbian troops. Okay, this is the Kosovo War. But Clinton failed to intervene when 800,000 people were murdered in Rwanda in Africa in 1994. Okay, so he intervenes when ethnic Albanians are being pushed out of the region, are being murdered by Serbian and Yugoslavian troops. But there's hundreds of thousands of murders taking place in Rwanda in Africa in 94, and Clinton does not intervene. Now, the genocide was the result of tribal conflict between 2 different groups: the Hutus, all right, the Hutus who were the majority in Rwanda, and the Tutsis. Okay, the Tutsi rebel forces had been working to gain more political representation in Rwanda, okay? But Hutu extremists did not want to see that happen. So after a plane that was carrying the Rwandan president, who was a Hutu, after that plane was shot down and the president died, Hutu extremists began the mass murder of Tutsis throughout the country, right? And President Clinton did not send in U.S. forces to stop these murders, and 800,000 people were killed. That's the Rwandan genocide.